Welcome to First Unitarian Universalist Public Affairs Forum. My name is Carolyn Grevinger, and I'm co-chair. Our program's mission is to nourish the mind and the spirit and to serve social justice. Thank you for attending today. Our forums occur on most Sundays at noon and are free and open to the public. We encourage you to attend. Our church is located at 4700 Grover Avenue. For more information about our Public Affairs Forum, you can go to our church website at www.austinuu.org. Now I'm going to introduce Sharon Zeugin. She is a member of our church here and an artist. Her interests include making art, teaching and facilitating workshops in her Central Austin studio and throughout the United States, Canada, and Italy. Influenced by her training as a therapist, Sharon seeks to cultivate a safe classroom environment in which respect for body, mind, and spirit are as important as skill building. Her students are encouraged to experience art making as an experimental, intuitive, and mindful practice. In addition to being a faculty member of numerous international calligraphy conferences, Sharon heads the annual 2-week Literally Letters program at Ghost Ranch, New Mexico. She is also a faculty member of the Austin Contemporary Art School. Her award-winning work appears in publications such as Letter Arts Review, The Calligrapher's Engagement Calendar, Somerset Studio Magazine, and the Lark book, The Art and Craft of Hand Lettering. Let's welcome Sharon Zeugin.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank Carolyn, who over lunch, a couple of months ago, invited me to be here. And I feel like I'm following in the very, very serious footsteps of people like Nobel Prize winners. That said, I feel very honored. Thank you. And I am a member of this church, although I like to say I'm a backsliding Unitarian. I'd like to get right to it. First, I'd like to address the title of this talk. It's rather audacious. In fact, I'm reading from the book of Sharon, by the way. These are my notes, and I have other notes up here. I just thought that's a crazy thing to say, especially in light of the daily bombings in Aleppo, the Trump-inspired hatred and vitriol and misogyny, and in the words of Lin-Manuel Miranda from his song, one of his songs from the musical Hamilton, it feels like our world is turned upside down. But so in light of that, I asked myself, how can I be an artist when there's so much suffering in the world? How can art have meaning in the face of so much need and so much that's going on around us that's just chaotic and totally irrational and crazy? And so that's kind of the premise of my talk, is to actually explore with you my own process of addressing that, personally, and also just share with you, I call it confessions, anecdotes, and observations from my journey as an artist, and also in working with so many people who come to art, particularly later in life. And I have really been honored to see the profound shifts in people related to tolerance, related to self-esteem and skill building, and shifts in terms of how they experience the world. So that has helped me somewhat in my own existential ongoing crises of how can I bring meaning in the world that is turned upside down. So what I want to start with, though, first is I'm going to read a quote, and then I'll tell you a little bit about my background and then some of my observations. This is from a woman named Julia Molden, and she says, "Even when we have nothing left, there is always music, words, and dance steps to bring us back to life. Art has the power to inspire, heal, transform, to rehabilitate, to bear witness, and to make us believe there are better days ahead." Interestingly enough, by the way, my last name, Zeugin, means witness, and I think it's very telling that that's been my role, a witness for other people's art-making processes and my own. And just another thought, this isn't a quote, but it actually came from my husband in a discussion we had yesterday. I am thinking about the meaning of art, and he said art is a lens through which we understand, experience, and interpret our world. And I can go on a lot about that, and I want to do that later on. But I just, in broad strokes, I just want to say, I was just in Italy. I had the opportunity to lead a group, and I've done this is the third time, a sketch group in Umbria. And I was just stunned, always, as ever. I'm always stunned, again and again, at how much art there is everywhere. And not just that crazy art you see in well, I don't mean crazy as insane, but just there's so much of it in the Vatican or in the Vatican Museum, but just on the street, I'd walk around and suddenly see there's a Virgin Mary on the wall, and it just seemed like art is everywhere. And I don't know how that really feeds into the topic, does art save the world, but it seems like a very important part of how we deal with it. But anyway, I want to say a little bit about myself. I am Sharon. I live here in Austin, Texas, and I have had the privilege of teaching, or I say facilitating art for the past 15 years. I have a degree from the University of Southern California, or as my daughter, who's a Stanford student, says, the University of Spoiled Children, in Southern California. I went there actually to major in music, but at 18 realized I don't know enough to get all focused on one thing, and that was a very wise decision, because I majored in history, very practical of me. But really what I always wanted to do was be an artist, but I always felt like, oh, art, that's not serious enough, or it's too selfish, or it's too egocentric, anyway, or it's too hard. I didn't think I was talented enough. But anyway, fast forward to moving to Texas, which is a whole other story, because I'm from California, and I attended UT and got my master's in social work. Actually, I really wanted to be a Jungian analyst, but there again, I thought, oh, that's so selfish, that's so lofty, I want to be on the front lines and help people. So instead of becoming one, I went into analysis at age 28, and my analyst, who was actually analyzed by one of Jung's students, said, that's awfully young to be in a Jungian analysis, but I've always been a troubled soul and thinker, and I took everything very personally, and so it was very appropriate for me to do that. But anyway, I always wanted to be an artist, and I always struggled with that, because again, it was like, how can I be an artist in the face of the world that needs so much? Well, fast forward again to getting married, having a baby, perfect time to go off to England when the opportunity called. I say that ironically, because it's kind of difficult to go off to England when you have a not even 2-year-old. But my husband got accepted at the University of London College for a Master's of Law. And I had always wanted to go to the University of Surrey, the Roehampton Institute, to study calligraphy and bookbinding. Another point for practicality, Meanwhile, I have my art degree, and I was a social worker at the time, mind you. I skipped that part. I had been out on the front lines, so I'd worked with catastrophically ill children and their families at Any Day We Can. I worked at the Center for Attitudinal Healing. I run a bereavement group. I worked at Shoal Creek Hospital on Saturdays. I was the only person in a room full of oftentimes 20 very depressed people. So I had done my time, and I was on the front lines. I saw the suffering, and I saw, how much burnout there was among social workers. And I just want to give a shout out to those like Carolyn who continue in that the quest to make the world a better place in that role. And by the time I left and went to London, I was actually working on a group that I helped design called Frontlines through United Way, which my passion was helping the helpers and working on vicarious traumatization and trying to lend support for those people who get so little in resources. But anyway, so I went to London, and I'd always been interested in calligraphy. Calligraphy is an interesting art form because you deal with words and making words beautifully, and I always wanted to do that, and I had done that. In fact, back at USC, I was hired as a sign painter on the side, and I would do a lot of signs for various people, and I actually taught a calligraphy class there, and that was like the blind leading the blind, because I didn't have any training. But anyway, I'd always wanted to do calligraphy, but honestly, it was one step removed from my larger desire to be an artist, whatever that meant. So I went to London, studied calligraphy, and actually that's going to lead into a very important shift in my life, and it gave me a sense of purpose, and I'm getting to that. But anyway, I went to calligraphy school thinking I was going to be a great calligrapher and dazzle people with my lettering. And I got there, and I was very humbled because my teachers were not interested in technical virtuosity. They were interested in these really annoying questions that sparked yet more existential anxiety, and those were, what do you want to say? Why do you want to say it? And how do you want to say it? And I thought, what? I thought I was just going to write, pretty writing. And so that made me really consider what my role was going to be as a calligrapher. If I was going to leave social work and go off and be this calligraphic artist, I thought it was just about pretty writing. No, it wasn't. It was about what words am I going to use? So that actually made me do a really deep dive and kind of got me into a real feminist attitude of, wait a minute, all the words we're writing as calligraphers are usually those of, no offense, but dead white men. And also the calligraphy, Western calligraphy is really a very patriarchal, very male, masculine, kind of design and centered thing. And so I didn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and my time in London as a calligrapher made me question what my role was going to be as a 21st century female scribe. So, just throw that into the mix of all my existential crises. And it really actually led to, when I came home, I was sitting around going, am I going to do wedding invitations? What am I going to do? I've given up the social work field, and now I'm sitting in my studio doing what? And actually I went to Book People, and I found this book, it found me, and it was called The Journey is the Destination by Dan Eldon. Actually, it was by his mother and his sister compiled his journals. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Dan Eldon, but he was the youngest Reuters photojournalist in history. He was like 23 when he was stoned to death in Somalia for actually by the very crowd who he was trying to help. He was trying to bring awareness to all the horrors being perpetrated there. But what stunned me about the book was his mother and sister had compiled all these excerpts from his journals, and they were bound in these very unremarkable black books like this. And they were never meant for anybody to see, per se, but anyway, they were stunning. And I was so moved because the art wasn't pretty. It wasn't even, he wouldn't have even shown it as art, that there was this authenticity of his experience. And key for me was I found my way. I knew I wasn't going to be doing art the way he did, but I liked the idea of working in a book and with unremarkably bound, machine-bound pages, and that was going to be how I would focus my time. Not very practical, but it really touched me. So I spent a year actually just working in this journal or playing and creating this thing, and then I went to a calligraphy conference the next year, and a friend of mine, actually he's Jewish, he's one of the top Jewish calligraphers in the world, Hebrew scribes, lives in Jerusalem. He said, you should show this to people. And long story short, I did, and that's how people started asking me to come teach. And what they wanted me to teach was journaling, art journaling. And so that was my portal, my entree into teaching. And I get asked to teach all kinds of things, sketching, formal calligraphy, but I was really moved that people saw something, because that whole book that I did for a whole year was not about being pretty, it wasn't about being precious, it wasn't about making art to sell, it was like, what am I trying to say? It was addressing those questions. And so, anyway, that's how I started teaching. And what was important about that is that in dealing with calligraphers especially, our tribe, we're very focused on getting things right. We're so highly trained to, the skills that that it takes to do these really fussy documents extolling virtues of whoever. You know, it takes a lot, and I'm very well trained to do that, and so are my tribe. But I was getting people in my classes who were interested in something more. They didn't want it. They'd had all the accolades. They'd had all the preciousness or all the skills. They wanted something from here. So that's what I started addressing, and I actually got the title of Dr. Phil of the calligraphy world. So, but I found that I kept seeing that what I was doing was less teaching skills. It was more like giving people permission to come out onto the blank page and experience something maybe that they hadn't experienced before. Maybe maybe a calligrapher had never learned to draw before. Or so they felt safe in the pages of a blank book, and that became my focus. And so, what I started to realize is that people, they're so fearful. I mean, I'd see it in my art, and I'm not trained as an art therapist, but I ended up doing a lot of quasi-art therapy. But I realized in the pages of blank books, people really feel vulnerable, and they felt, I would see them talk about unlived dreams, traumas that they'd had. So I realized that, and also I saw people making a deeper connection with themselves. And that's really the point I want to get to, is that eventually I branched out and I started teaching drawing, because I always wanted to be an artist. And I thought, to be an artist, a real artist, you have to learn how to draw and paint. And that is a wrong assumption, by the way. By the way, all of you all can call yourselves artists, because doing art is about how you engage with the world. And pie makers or gardeners or social justice workers or, musicians, it doesn't have to be like, I paint a picture. And so I just want to, point that out too. That's what I've learned. But anyway, in learning to draw, I was very obsessed about and helping people learn to draw. I originally got caught up ironically, in thinking I wasn't skilled enough and all that. Then I read a book, and I have it I have actually bibliography on the back of one of these boards, and I'm going to talk about these boards actually in a little bit. The bibliography, it shows Dan Eldon and some of the other resources and authors that I refer to. But the book that had such a profound influence on me and really started a broader thinking in my mind about this whole art saves the world is Frederick Frank, and a lovely book called Zen Seeing, Zen Drawing. Has anybody of you heard of that book at all, or the Zen of Seeing? Well, this book, which I keep by my bedside, it's one I return to over and over again, made such an impact on me because he was a dentist actually, and this fellow, Frederick Frank, and he actually went to Africa, and he was a photographer, and he also worked for the Albert Schweitzer Institute. Anyway, in taking pictures of some of the native people where he was working, they didn't want him to take pictures because they felt like it was robbing their souls, and that's what he would say. So he started drawing. Long story short, in drawing, he realized he was actually starting to see things. The drawing makes you slow down. It makes you, you have to be still. You can't be all over the place. And I know my mother can attest to this because she just took my drawing class in Italy a couple of weeks ago. But anyway, the remarkable thing that he noticed is that in slowing down and in really seeing what you're drawing, you start feeling connected with it. And if you're connected with something, you're far less likely to do harm to that. And you're also far more likely to feel like you are not separate from the world, you are part of the world. And I thought that was really, really profound, the implications of that this developed sensitivity and mindfulness through a simple act of drawing could have far-reaching effects. And so in my work as a facilitator of drawing, I have seen this over and over again, and I'll just tell you a few little stories about that. I have a couple of women who came to me as a calligraphy class. They came to take my classes, and they came to Italy with me about 2 years ago. and they'd never drawn before, and they loved it, and they were very open about learning. And anyway, a year later, they went to Paris for a month, and they kept texting me. It was torture, because they say, Sharon, we're at the Eiffel Tower, and we're sketching. And I'm like, why am I not there with you? But anyway, they said, we're sketching everything. We never do this. Usually we're shopping. We're, running around taking pictures. We're trying to capture the Parisian experience. When they got home, they took me out for a drink, and they thanked me profusely. They said, we have learned to really see. I mean, we really experience this differently. They thanked me profusely. They said, you have opened our eyes, and you have helped us experience the world in such a different way. And I thought, that's pretty amazing. I was really touched by that. And that's been an experience I've heard with a lot of the students that I've had. So anyway, in the spirit of brevity, I could tell you more stories like that. What I've learned, though, in facilitating classes is that art making inspires community. I have a cadre of people who feel they come from all parts of Austin, and they are a mix of religious preferences and political preferences. And here's where the social justice and tolerance part comes in. And again, these are little bits. They're like, okay, somebody has a little shift. They see Paris differently, or somebody tolerates something. But I think it adds up to a huge amount of each person's individual experience makes up the world. So I think those little shifts are at least moving us towards maybe saving our world more than if they weren't making those shifts. But anyway, I had two people in my class. One is very identified Republican, Democrat, and they got into a big argument about, something like abortion, and so I acted as a mediator, and I said, why don't we start with the language of commonality? But anyway, by the end of it, they were they started they had more respect for one another, and and I'm doing broad strokes here, but they really learned to listen to each other. And I thought, this is so interesting that I'm facilitating this kind of tolerance thing in Guero's during a Sketch Austin group. So, but those kinds of experiences, I think, are more common than not. So I think, as I've said, under my teaching insights, I've watched people reduce stress. I've seen them improve their marriage. I've seen them connect with themselves in profound and deep ways, build community. They have, increased tolerance for one another. And back to what Frederick Franks talks about in Zen drawing, I have personally experienced this myself, of connecting through art. Art as a way, as I say, has helped me connect more deeply with the world because I'm more sensitive to it. And I think that's really, I think that's my bottom line. I did have to go back. We are in the Unitarian Universalist Church here, and we do value the intellect. So of course I have to have the little point about what do the experts say. So there are many experts, and you can do a deep dive into all the benefits of art. But just most recently, I was reading about why it's important to have art as a curriculum in schools, because to really encourage whole brain thinking, to encourage good analytical thinking, problem solving, esteem building, confidence. It's not about, you have to develop your right brain or your left. It's about both of them working together. I thought that was interesting. So it's the New York Center for the Art Education had a whole article about this online. Also, there's a guy, Dr. Lawrence Katz, who talks about not just the obvious stress release that can happen with stuff like coloring, the coloring book craze, painting, drawing. He also talks about how art can help reduce mental decline, and through helping brain cells have more plasticity and connectivity. So if you want to read more about that, you can. And also I read this was a really important thing, and then I'm going to kind of wrap this up and ask you about what you think. Because remember, I want to reiterate, maybe I didn't say this, but this is more of a personal query for me. Does art save the world? And it's also a provocation. It's to get us to think about what is the role of art in the face of the madness that we face. But anyway, there's this a woman named Natalie Sanchez who wrote an article for the Huffington Post, which I thought was interesting. She's an educator of young children in Los Angeles, and she works with multicultural kids, kids from all backgrounds. And she has them do self-portraits, and involved in those self-portraits, they have to bring icons and imagery from their particular cultural heritage. And she has seen a lot of, in her words, a profound shift in the confidence about themselves personally and in terms of their linkage to their heritage in doing this. And she argues that art making, especially with young children, is extremely important. So also one of the psychologists / what would you call him? C.G. Jung had such an influence on me. As I said earlier, I was in Jungian analysis, and I thought his making a mandala every day was a really important part of his practice. And I think he's made his work and his insights about that support the importance of art making. I feel like for everything I say, there are 500,000 things left unsaid. But that's just a little bit about my story and my journey. I'm still grappling with the question of, does what I do make a difference? I'm about to go to, I love this term, I've been doing graphic recording for various corporations, and I hear this all the time, a deep dive into actually making art. This is a big shift for me because I've been teaching so much, and now I'm going to walk my talk and finally, at the age of 56, step into, I'm going to paint every day and draw and let the world go on around without me and see what happens. So that's the big shift for me. And anyway, I want to open up a dialogue with you all and see what your thinking is about what is the role of the artist, and do we have value in this world in terms of things like I say, you can just open a newspaper, turn on Facebook, and just scroll down, and there are so many horrors and things to trouble us. But I want to hear what you think about, does art save the world, and how? So anybody have any thoughts on that?
Thank you very much, Sharon. We're going to start with our question and answers now. If you would stand up and introduce yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, hello, yes, I'm Jim Bryce. Interesting background that you have here. I believe you are on to something. That is, does art save the world? What's actually going on in our economy is something most people are not quite aware of yet, but I would submit it's going to play into what you're talking about. As our science and as our technology develops more and more things like artificial intelligence, etc., doing tasks that were previously done by people, from an economist viewpoint, we're approaching, and this will be decades, a question of the marginal utility of human labor. Basically what that means, if I may translate, is that for a great deal of what our economy has had and has been providing payment to people to do,
yes,
will be done by this technology. And the question is, what will people do? Maybe from an economic viewpoint, we'll get a minimum income. But the question is, even with that, what will they do? And art appears to be one of the major directions for that future of the human race. So help us.
Thank you. I do want to say they're on my little the back of one of these cards, which are here for the church to keep, by the way. Daniel Pink, a whole new mind, or he talks about how right-brained people will save the world. He alludes to that in very broad strokes. He talks about that, about what are we going to do when we have all this time freed up, and the importance of art. And by the way, I do want to put a shout out to art too. My daughter, she'll get mad at me for bragging about her, but she went to the McCallum Academy down the road, and she's very smart, and she turned down Lhasa, she turned down all the saints, she said, and everybody was like, oh my God, what about your academic future? Into Stanford. And one of the things that one of her readers of her Stanford application said was impressive was her art background. Like, And they make a very big deal about, it's not just all the people inventing Facebook, but it's like they need critical thinkers who are trained more broadly than just, a narrow computer science. No offense to computer science, but they want artists in their midst. So, but anyway, thank you.
We have a question from Luther Elmore.
Sharon, thanks for being with us today. And I have a question about you diving deep into art.
Yeah.
That is, if your perspective is that art saves the world, then how does this new endeavor on your part, how is that going to save you?
I think, because to the fact, and my husband, that I have been putting this off for a long time, and I've been very irritable. Well, to go back, after I got back from my Roehampton experience, I was sitting around feeling sorry for myself. Because it's really cool to go to school where you walk into a room and it says calligraphy and bookbinding. And I did not want to leave that. Then getting home, I thought, I don't want to just do wedding invitations. No offense, but that was what I was called to do. So it would really save me. I mean, I started painting and drawing. And so I wanted to get back. It's like, I've been seeing it on the horizon. I think it's going to. Did I mess up my? Oh, there. I feel called. I went on an artist. I was lucky to be on an artist residency in Taos in January, and I had 2 weeks of uninterrupted art making there, and I loved it so much, and I felt so inspired, and I felt so alive, and my mom can attest to that. And saw the pictures on Facebook. I think it's going to bring me back to life, and I have a lot to say with my art. And the experience I've had when I have a show, or people feel moved by it. So in that sense, it saves me, and it may not save them, but it helps me have a voice in a way that I can't just by talking. So that's what I'm looking forward to, and I think I'm going to be part of a greater conversation with my art. So,
first of all, I just wanted to say I really relate with what your experience is as an artist and an art teacher. I too really struggle with that idea of, am I worth putting it out there? Is what I have to say worth saying? And to your question, does art save the world? One thing that's kept me going is this idea in a modern world where we consume and we consume and we consume, and the definition of consume means to use up and destroy. The idea of being an artist is to create. And so if that's the mindset, is what can we create and what is our responsibility in doing so, instead of just what can we use. So.
Oh, I love that. I love that because, and I especially relate to that because I know I've had pressure. Understandably, my husband, I will say, he's a saint. He's supported me, and I've had to deal with all of that, angst of oh, I'm supposed to be a feminist, but I'm being supported by a husband. And then there's the opportunity guilt of being supported. And anyway, and there's always been that slight, why don't you do a coloring book because that's what will sell? Or why don't you paint pictures of guitars because that's what will sell? And I just have never been able to think of art as a commodity. So, and it comes back to your question about when I do my deep dive, I use the word spiritual very cautiously because it is so loaded, but I feel so deeply connected with something bigger than me, and I don't know what it is. When I'm in the art making process, I feel so connected and alive, and that's all I know. And it's almost like I get, in the words of Julia Cameron, who wrote The Artist's Way, marching orders. But I have to get into that state. It's like an altered state, and I have to show up with the paint and the whatever materials I'm using to do that. And that's kind of what dictates the art. But it's not a commodity, and it's not about, and that's a really weird thing, because here I can spend hours, months on something and go, who the heck cares? Maybe nobody. It might just sit there, And I do have a lot of art in my studio, and I look around and go, oh, I love you, you're my children. And then I think maybe nobody else will love you, and you'll probably be burned and go away, or it'll all fade. Who knows? And so that's a really strange, weird thing to struggle with. And I appreciate you saying that, because I feel like I'm not alone.
In answer to the question, how does art save the world? I think it's generative in ways that are beyond understanding.
Yay!
That you're not just solving for a blank in a problem, it's creative in such an expansive way that sometimes you don't even realize what you're creating when you're creating.
Yeah.
You create and then you step back, or you present into the world and others recognize that it's the solution. But
Yeah.
in the act of the process, you may not understand. You may be actually moved by the art rather than moving the art.
Thank you.
Is
Yes.
the way to best present it. That it's the act of creation, and then others see what its benefit is, or you see it. And sometimes in the act of creation, you don't see it, but later it takes time.
Yes. Oh,
Thank
that's
you.
beautifully
I just
articulated.
wanted to think how inspiring this is. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I feel inspired. I felt each of you who've contributed to this, I feel my heart just soars because you get it. You're getting this beautifully articulated. I feel like sometimes it's not my responsibility to analyze it or figure it out. That's why it's so hilarious when I'm asked to fill out something for like going on a residency. You have to talk about the meaning of your art or what you're going to produce. And all my artist friends, we laugh. We just make something up because we have to, but we have no idea. It's a mystery, and and that's where the spirit comes in, or this. I feel like in that act of creation, you are a part of this, again, some sort of mysterious process, an alchemical process that may or may not you won't know what that is till much later. So
We have about 20 to 25 minutes left, so plenty of time. I have a question.
oh yeah.
So I want to go along with you on your journey sometime when you go like to Central Market or when you go over to Warehouse. Can you tell us more about what happens in that process, like when you take your little art tours around
yeah.
Austin and how the communication lines up and up?
Sure. Well, one of the classes I've been doing lately that has been really fun is called Sketch Austin. And so I designed that class not knowing what I was doing, of course, after having been in 2010 asked to teach in Italy for 2012. And I thought, I've never led a class around Italy. How am I going to do that? Well, let me start in Austin. I'll do that. So I get this group of people, and we usually start at my studio, and then we go out to various what I call quintessential Austin places, like the Zilker Botanical Gardens. We've actually gone to the Sunshine Community Gardens, the Capitol. We've gone everywhere. But one of my favorite places to go, and this is going to answer your question, is Central Market or Whole Foods. And I go into the produce section, and I just think it's the most beautiful thing. And we all do. And we go pick out some really cool looking vegetable. And it could be something as seemingly unremarkable as a bell pepper. And then bring it back to a table which I've commandeered. 10 o'clock in the morning. It's not hard to find a table at Whole Foods unless it's during ACL. But anyway, we sit around and we just I have people, my students, I actually have them close their eyes and feel what a bell pepper feels like, or I have them look at it and go, look at all these little shapes. And that goes back to what Frederick Frank talks about with Zen seeing, Zen drawing, because you look at this bell pepper and it could just be one of many bell peppers, but when you really look at it, it's its own thing and you really see it. So we do stuff like that. We rhapsodize about bell peppers, or we go over to Zilker Botanical Gardens and I'll have people say, I have driven by this, I have been here many times, but I've never really seen it. I love it when I hear that. Same in Whole Foods. People go, I'm usually in a hurry because I'm shopping. I'm shopping as for a commodity. But they start looking at things so differently. And that's what's so much fun about taking groups. In Italy recently, I've been doing this for several years, and I'm so happy to have my mother who came along and my two daughters. We go out to various little towns in Umbria. And then we're housed in a converted monastery. How cool is that? Because the art studio is a converted, it's the former chapel of the monastery, a 16th century Capuchin monastery. So we would alternate, we'd go out every day to little markets, or we'd go out to Assisi or Orvieto, big cities, and then we'd come back and we'd draw and we'd paint. And really what I think, even my mom might be able to attest to this, what people were having most fun with was even in the face of these extraordinary things like a cathedral, they wanted to paint an olive branch or a flower in the garden, and they were so thrilled to do that for two reasons. Because they really got to see the flower, because when you're trying to draw it or paint it, you really see it, but also the feeling of they did it. So anyway, I don't know if that answers your question, but it's always great to hear, I really see this now. That's my favorite thing to hear.
Well, what you're saying obviously is sounds a lot like Eastern philosophies, and so that idea of the attention and the presence and the meditation, that's one thing I want to know. Could you talk a little bit about that presence and meditation as you're doing this? And then in addition to that, you're talking about the coloring book craze. What part and what level does that play into this art in relationship to the world?
Well, I think, let me talk about the second part of that, the coloring book craze. I actually want to give a shout out to a good friend of mine, Rebecca Borelli, who's done the Austin coloring book. If you'll see it in stores all over, and she's been commissioned by HEB to Ag and Tom's. And anyway, she has been riding this edge of this explosion of that. And what I think is, and these are her words too, she thinks people feel out of control with the world. A coloring book, it's all done for you. But what's not done is you get to color. You get to have the choice. You've got containment. You've got, borders. You have a manageable something that's already there. And then your part is to color in. And there are coloring parties where people go to. I think it's a really relaxing thing. I mean, I've been coloring. I like to make up my own coloring stuff, but, so I still do that. Carolyn was sitting next to me during church, and I was doing that. So I think it really speaks to a need and a desire for people to slow down. And I think there's a mindfulness that comes from it. I know people my mom has friends they spend a lot of time with these coloring books. So like I said, I think people are needing that. And I think it does produce relaxation and a sense of focus. And even as I'm talking about it, it's like, breath. Mindfulness and meditation. There are two parts to that. I think when people are learning something, and so if I teach a class where you're trying to learn a skill, less mindfulness because everybody's worried. There's all that chatter about, I got to do it right. So I have always trying to find a way to help them first get past their head and then actually on to doing whatever they're trying to do. I have experimented with classes like a couple summers ago. I just have people do what I want to do. I thought, let's do some mandalas or just work with circles. So I gathered people around my studio with black paper, because black paper is cool, with colored pencils. And I just said, okay, draw a circle, or you can use a paper cup and draw it. And anything in the circle or responding to the circle. And then we'd sit around. It was like and people would just share. But I'd have them do the first half hour in silence where we just color in. And they all felt they were more focused, and they reported that they were, they had that experience of mindfulness. And then I also had them generate haikus I'd said, start collecting lines of 5 syllables, 7. And at the end of the class, we made this book where it's a randomly generated haiku book, so you'd have to see it to see what that looks like. But that was my kind of experimentation by setting a very limited and simple parameter of just responding to a circle. That gave people the ease to simplify it, and they weren't worried about what skills they were doing or using or not. And so, but I've seen people in the drawing, like out in the field, Mom sees me. I was in the church in Spoleto. Have anybody been to Spoleto, Italy before? Oh my gosh, I was sitting in there communing with this just rockin' angel. This woman, do not mess with this angel. She was tough, and I was drawing, and I had all these monks coming around, people in robes, and it was great. I was so into it. I was in flow. I was just like one with that, and then I had to go, oh yeah, I got to be back, La Professoressa. I'm the teacher, so I had to make sure I rounded everybody up. But other people, my other friends on the trip, were experiencing the same thing of just the sense of just life. I mean, everything goes away. And what I feel after that is I feel like, okay, I can take on the newspaper heading where I see Trump, God knows what, fill in the blank. Or I can, it's just so that in that sense, yes, it saves me, it saves my friends. And you add up enough of those experiences, and we can take on these horrible things that are happening in the world. And it doesn't solve it. But I think of here's my way of learning the New Testament. Listening to Jesus Christ Superstar when I was 10. Thanks for Mom for buying that for me. And I loved it when Jesus finally yells, "Heal yourselves." And I thought, wait, that's kind of not very nice. He's like yelling at people, and I think that's where it starts. It's healing ourselves. So that's how art saves the world. It saves me, and I am, I am part of the world. So anybody else?
I work with after-school kids, and I've done a lot of fabric and liturgical art in churches with big installations.
Oh, nice.
The thing that speaks to me about your presentation is really the impact that it has on people, including also myself as an artist. And the thing that I've recognized, even working with kids, is that anytime you create a space for art, you're opening up a place for kids and adults to be vulnerable and work through their emotions. And it can be happiness or sadness, but if the world does all of that together and we all do that all together, then what you have is art, and whatever medium that is what's created. And art could be drawing with your finger in the sand, or it could be a kid cutting a Star Wars person out of cardboard or something like that. And it's all very, very important. So thank you.
Thank you so much. You just nailed it. I think articulated the part about you open a place of vulnerability. And that really describes what I was trying to do in so many words about what I've observed with facilitating art, whether it's calligraphers, first-time drawing students, painters. It's that place of vulnerability.
Yeah, hello. I just wanted to kind of echo on what was it Eric was saying, that most of the discussion has been about art from the viewpoint of the creator. But once a piece of art is in the world, there's also an audience for it. And that goes whether it's visual art or literary art, movies, any of that.
Yes.
So in that space, what's so important are the stories that we tell ourselves, both as the artist and as someone who's viewing the art. And it's really interesting to look at art history and go back and see what are the stories that people were telling themselves in a different culture in a different time.
Yes.
And so looking at our own art being created now says a lot.
Yes, that's beautifully put. Yeah. I want to talk about, as a person experiencing art, other people's art. And my mom has heard this ad nauseum, I am so taken by Hamilton. Do you guys know the musical Hamilton? Constantly. I think what an amazing piece of art, because it has inspired me to revisit history, see, is Aaron Burr such a bad guy? But the music, and it's just so profound, and I cry. I drive around listening to it, and I think there's something about this so timeless and universal, and it sparked so much interest in me. And I think that is like, and he's telling a story. The narrative of that is archetypal. It speaks to the narrative of what we're experiencing now. We think politics are so rough and ready. Well, they went out and, had duels and shot each other. And, so I don't know why the art helps me manage my feelings about the political climate more, or that I'm just in praise of somebody's genius as Lin-Manuel Miranda, who can write such great tunes and stuff and take the language of now, rap, hip hop, and bring this in, and using people. There's only one Caucasian guy in the whole thing. I think it's so awesome. So that piece of art has moved me amazingly. but also there's art that provokes too. I get really provoked actually by going to the Vatican or St. Peter's. I was really pissed off actually. I'm like, yay for the artists and all the work and the beauty of that. But it's like, wait a minute, this is supposed to be St. Peter's. You were supposed to represent Christianity, which I thought was about love and give up your everything and follow. It's not about excess and it's not about power. So it's so to have that experience. But there's and I'm sure many people have walked through that and had maybe not that experience, but I love the provocativeness and the story, the narrative, the constant way we interpret the stories, or has anybody been to Assisi and seen all the Giotto paintings? That's another. I try to imagine the people coming in, the illiterate masses, because remember in the 13th century, people couldn't read. The church had a lot of power. Imagine walking into this place out of your, you've been slogging along, doing whatever you do, and you walk into this. It's like an acid trip in there. It is crazy, especially on the floor. It's just colors and patterns, and I think, wow, to dazzle. And they're all the stories, the narratives of the biblical stories, because people couldn't read. So. But anyway, I can.
This is kind of the backstory, I suppose, on what you're talking about, and that is as art saving the world and artist therapy. With your background in counseling, do you have any experience or any knowledge about this being used in regards to therapy for children, especially children in areas of conflict?
I'm sure it does. I don't have any specific knowledge of that, but definitely know that art therapy is used with children in a variety of capacities. I don't know, does anybody have an answer to that? But I think I know that in my work as a social worker, I would bring art in, even though I wasn't supposed to. I wasn't commissioned as an art therapist, and I would go sitting around a table with a family whose one daughter at Brackenridge, dying of a brain tumor, up with the mom coloring while she was talking, and I just instinctively knew to do it. But I'd also be up in the treehouse with the little sister, and through art, through having her color, I got her to tell her story of how guilty she felt about, her sister and how she felt like she blamed it. So I feel like that was my one experience with it, but I'm sure that there are people working with art with children in a variety of capacities. Let's hope so. I want to tell you guys a story. Look this up online. I forgot to put it. I'll write it into our little bibliography on this board. But one of the most extraordinary experiences of installation art is by this artist named Anna Schuley. Her theme was working with the mentally ill and forgotten patients. And so it was a videotape of this. She did an installation in this kind of gothic 18th, 19th century abandoned psych hospital. So imagine the building and imagine it being kind of broken down. And imagine going through, it's like overturned chairs and, for a week, she filled the space with flowers. So imagine you walk through this hallway and there's just violets with broken down chairs, or like in the old pool it says deep end and she has like daffodils. And so the whole experience was to walk through this old building and it's filled with flowers, and the concept or the idea was simply all the flowers that these patients need. And I thought it was one of the most beautiful pieces of art. And then she did one more installation for people who actually had been, had been in this hospital years ago, and their families. She blasted out like a Bach oratorio out of the building, so the building is blasting his music, and then she filmed the people coming up and experiencing the building playing this amazing music. So I thought, that is profound. It's so simple. It's so beautiful, and it's ephemeral, but I just thought that was a real, to this day, so I think that it, again, does art save the world? I think we've identified that it definitely makes a dent in, some of the, it makes a dent in that. So.
We have time for one more question from Larry Courts. Sharon, I go to art museums for the magic and the history that I find there. And when I go, I take a list of the principles, the elements and principles of design so I can find out. But I have not heard you, I've heard you mention the word balance, but I haven't heard you mention all the 6 points of elements and the 6 points of principles of design. Would you make a comment on that?
In terms of teaching, or in terms of what makes great art, or
how to evaluate a painting?
Oh, yeah. I think, well, that's a good question. I think it's a little beyond the scope of my talk, but I definitely talk to people about, especially when I'm teaching a basic art class, is like looking at things in terms of the composition, look at how the light and dark, what is the value scale they're using, what are the, what's coming forward, what's moving back, the color scheme. I'm not sure if I'm addressing your question properly, but.
Well, I'll send Carol a list of the principles.
I'd love it, yeah.
And elements of design, because they're very strong. It's like having the notes to music. You can go forever and create something with these subjects.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Anyway, I'll make sure you get it.
I would love that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Any closing words or comments?
I just want to thank you. I know that your stomach is probably growling, and you're like me, like going, "Oh, I'm going to go to Mother's after this." And I appreciate your time and attention. And the whole point of this is to just keep open a dialogue and to share with you some of my, again, like I call it anecdotes, confessions, insights, and observations. And to say that, yeah, I do think it is a really important thing that we continue to be artful in our approach to the world. And in some sense, that saves us and it. So I just want to thank you so much.
And Sharon, you've inspired me, and I'm sure many people here. Thank you for coming and presenting to us today.
You're very welcome. As always, I do have one last thing I forgot to say. I wanted to say that one of the new, in addition to the deep dives I'm doing and making art, an area I have just gotten into in the last year, and I didn't even know about it, and I'm trying to let young people who are going into art curriculums know about it, is a field called graphic recording, where you actually real-time record a conversation. This is an example of a graphic recording of my thoughts as I was preparing for this talk. But I just spent 2 days last week at a high-tech conference, and I did 25 boards of 25 different talks while they were talking. No, I'm doing it as they go, and it's been a lot of fun to realize that it's a fun way to use my listening skills and my art skills. So just wanted to tell you a little bit about that. But these boards are for the church to keep, so you can have them as a reference point. And again, thank you so very much.